Tuesday, February the 15th, and welcome back to GoodFellows, a Hoover Institution broadcast examining social, economic, political, and geopolitical concerns. I'm Bill Whalen. I'm a Hoover Distinguished Policy Fellow. I will be your moderator today, and I literally have a ringside seat to greatness today because we're doing this in person, not Zoom. Sorry, General McMaster. We're doing it live in person. We have a special guest we'll get to in a minute. So when I say greatness, I'm referring to the historian Niall Ferguson, the economist John Cochrane, the geostrategist Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, and today our very special guest, Bari Weiss. You may know Bari. She is the proprietor of the Common Sense newsletter on Substack, and she is also the host of the podcast called
Honestly,
which you can find on
everywhere you get your podcasts, and honored to be an honorary good fellow for today.
Actually, you're a returning good fellow, Bari. And this is a special day in California. It's February the 15th. It is the last day of our state indoor mask mandate. But what most Californians don't realize is this mandate only applies to those counties that do not have a local mask mandate. So Californians waking up on the morning of February 16th are in for a surprise. Here in Santa Clara County, there will still be a mask mandate in effect, same as your Los Angeles County. Bari, you were on Bill Maher's show on HBO last month, and you said 4 words that set off a bit of a fire on cable television. And what did you
imagine that?
Yes,
to her great surprise.
Yes. And what did you say? I'm done with COVID.
Yeah, I'm done.
With this question?
No, I'm done with COVID.
One individual on a cable news network said that you were acting childishly. Another cable network claimed that you were, being mean, essentially cruelty, I think was the word they used, linked you to white supremacy.
Yes.
So this is your chance to A, apologize and grovel.
Jewish lesbian Nazi here, white supremacist.
Okay.
Yeah.
So door number 1, you may grovel and apologize.
Yeah, not
Door number 2, you may double down. Well, let's
Yes.
go to door number 3. Explain what you said when you said you're over COVID, because COVID's not done with us.
Yeah, so what I meant by that is obviously not to denigrate or dismiss the millions of people that have died from this horrible pandemic, which now in our 3rd year, I think, feels like a lot more than that.
Right.
But that's the story that's been told, and that's been told over and over and over again every single day in the legacy press. The invisible victims of COVID and the ones that we're now sort of just starting to hear about are the people, especially children, who have suffered unbelievable learning loss, social and emotional growth, and the most stark victims of that, and this is something we've been reporting on a lot on Honestly and also on Common Sense, have been those children from poor and minority communities. The whole idea, right, was stay home and stay safe. For those of us that come from homes where there is safety and food and a good Wi-Fi connection, that was doable. Everyone sitting here is a member of the Zoom class. For the people that are not the members of the Zoom class, or what the journalist Alec McGillis has called the Amazon Coalition, the people that actually make the cardboard boxes and deliver the Amazon and the DoorDash or the caviar or whatever to you, those people have suffered enormously. And I hope we'll get to this, but we're starting to see, I think, the sort of primal scream, not just from angry COVID moms, who I think are going to sway the 2022 election, but that's also what the trucker protest in Toronto is about. Now we're starting to see that in Israel, in Germany, in places all over the world, maybe soon DC. So when I say COVID's over, I mean I am sick of living in a world in which celebrities and the mayor of Los Angeles can go to the Super Bowl, party in their boxes without masks, and the next day, Los Angeles school children have to go to school and wear masks indoors and outdoors. This despite the fact that something around 800 children over the past 2 years total have died from this with or from COVID. The CDC doesn't distinguish. Why is that? That's what I mean. I'm sick of the illogic. I'm sick of the nonsense. I'm sick of draconian rules that make no sense at all and that are creating a 2-tiered system between Americans that I think is un-American and wrong.
Here's what you told Bill Maher.
This is going to be remembered by the younger generation as a catastrophic moral crime.
I really believe that.
Agree?
Well, I thought it was very interesting that when you said that, you got a huge cheer from the live audience. And you also got one from me, because I don't think what you were saying was some kind of emotional spasm at odds with scientific reality. In fact, the pandemic has long passed its peak and in effect is transitioning into an endemic disease with an infection fatality rate that is now around about or below that of influenza. So it wasn't actually something that was irrational that you were saying. It is over, and we are right to be fed up with it. The people who are now in hospital in serious illness are people who've declined to be vaccinated.
Yes.
Right.
And that is a very different situation from the one that we were in right up until the middle of last year when vaccines were just becoming widely available. So I agreed wholeheartedly with what you said. What was fascinating to me was the reaction to what you said, some of which Bill just quoted, that was the crazy thing. There are clearly some people who can't quite let go of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of maskaholics. And I see them kind of masked with at least 2, if not 3 masks, giving me death stares if I don't have the mask on. But I'm with you, and I tell you who else is with you. My kids are with you. Thomas is 10, Campbell is 4, still have to wear masks at school. It's obviously pointless. They know it's pointless. Certainly Thomas knows it's pointless. Campbell just kind of puts up with it. But you certainly are right that this has been a disaster for kids, especially kids in public school, unlike my privileged children, who have been deprived of education for a crazily long time. In fact, American children have had much, much less schooling over the last 2 years than their European counterparts, even in countries where COVID was actually as bad, if not worse. The British schools were not closed for that long. The American schools, because of the power of the teachers' unions, have been closed for much longer on average than schools in Europe. And as for masks, I was in England last week. There are no masks on the kids in English schools. So this is outrageous. And it makes no scientific sense.
And I think also if you believe that the vaccines work, and I ran to get it as soon as I could, and you believe that the vaccines are life-saving, isn't it vaccine denialist to claim that COVID's not over once we have the vaccines? Right? I don't get it. Like, at what point does it end? Right. And that's what I was trying to get at.
Did you get COVID yet?
Okay, this is what's crazy. Either I had it in the very beginning, which I think I did. I had such a serious respiratory infection. I went to the allergist, like I thought something was wrong. So either I was like victim 0 in Manhattan, or I'm the person that's literally done everything wrong and has somehow not gotten it. I don't know.
It is a little embarrassing not to have had Omicron by now.
Yes. I mean, it's like not being canceled at this point. You're doing something wrong if you haven't been canceled. It means you're taking no risk.
So if I could, maybe if you were to be able to add an adjective, you might say, you're not over COVID. We're not over COVID. It's an endemic disease. You're over COVID policy. You're over ineffective, dreadfully costly, anti-scientific, completely crazy COVID policy, such as forcing screaming preschoolers to wear masks.
I wish they screamed, John. You know what's really depressing is they just put up with it.
Some
but
do.
They all look sad. I just have the impression, looking at the kids in the morning when I drop Campbell off, as they put their masks on, that school is not a lot of fun because you can't actually fully engage as a 4-year-old with people whose faces you cannot properly see. So, I think this is an important point.
Well, maybe your children are learning early that school is full of people telling them things that aren't true.
This is going to be, by the way, the most right-wing generation that America's ever seen.
It's already obvious. Generation T, they came of age, or they had their first political experiences under him who must not be named.
The elites are full of it, and wait till the teachers try to tell them a lot of others. But I want to, so you mentioned on one of your podcasts, too, something I've noticed, we're going backwards. An example you gave was on the school masking, where originally it was maybe to protect grandma at home, then maybe to protect the teachers. Then came it's always an answer in search of a question. The crazy idea we're there to protect the children, which, as you mentioned, doesn't. It's deeply unscientific. All of this stuff is deeply unscientific in the face of a exponentially growing disease. This is just my one pitch for how this is dumb. Suppose masks actually did reduce infections 20%. Well, if you could reduce car crashes 20%, maybe, everyone wears a mask, reduce car crashes. But when something's growing and it's doubling every 2 weeks, making it only double every 2.5 weeks is basically a waste of time if there's any cost. And the costs are huge.
John, can I ask you a question?
I wanted to ask Bari a question.
Sure. I'll hold on to my question.
Well, yeah, no,
but there is a big economics question waiting to be asked. Go ahead.
Well, the first question is the public policy, public psychology. This isn't just the scientists who refuse to be scientific. It's not just the politicians who refuse to be scientific, it's also the public demanding it. So what are we doing in California? We have no statewide mask mandate. Actually, I'm all for it. Let localities do it. If Palo Alto wants to pass, keep wearing masks for the next 10 years, let them do it.
Right.
But it is a law in response to public pressure. But what is going on? Why are we in this situation where our public policy, product of, science that's gone wrong, politics that's gone wrong, voters and pressure groups that go wrong, that is so dysfunctional and getting worse?
Do you mean why is it so screwed up, or why aren't people sort of emitting a primal scream in unison?
Well,
Which
people
part of it?
are beginning to emit a primal scream in unison.
I think the question is like, why are the people who are in charge of the policy, why are they not over it?
Well, what happened with
Right?
schools?
Because it doesn't apply to them.
Take the mask.
Because they don't abide
Great
by
for
these
them.
rules. Look, think of the UK.
They love the pandemic.
The whole point, the great scandal that ought by now to have swept Boris Johnson from power, is a scandal about hypocrisy.
Right.
It's about the fact that the elite made a whole set of rules
Yes.
that they didn't themselves abide by, and there was a party in Downing Street basically every week. And I think part of what is making Canada, on one of those rare occasions, interesting, is
Fascinating.
precisely
I can't not look away.
the disconnect between ordinary people's experience and the attitudes of the political elite personified by Justin
But
Trudeau.
there are also teachers and teachers unions which keep wanting the masks to go on and come up with endless unscientific arguments why this
I mean, this
charade
is a
to keep going.
psychological question that I'm not equipped to ask, although I'm sure the historians and the strategists in this conversation can illuminate it more. Not to sound too dark or cynical, but people really like power. And there was a power that was granted through these restrictions that I think once people tasted it have been very, very hard to let go of. I also see it in a way as being connected. I'm sorry, Bill.
No, it's because HR Sausage sees a historian.
No, I was just going
Yeah.
to say, I think it is about control and power, and I'd like you to continue on that vein, and why you think, why they want control? Why do they want to have, a patriarchal, matriarchal society where they're caring for us who don't know any better? And then also, I think it says a lot about just our resilience as a society, that I think so many people are willing to surrender to a certain extent to the disease, and from a historian's perspective, I'm thinking of Mark Bloch's book, Strange Defeat, about France in 1940, a brilliant book. And this is a manuscript that was found in the attic of a famous historian who also served as a reserve officer in the French army. And he wrote an examination, an explanation of the French army's rapid defeat in 1940. Sadly, he was killed a week before D-Day. He was a member of the resistance. He was executed by the Nazis. And the manuscript was discovered years later. It's a fascinating story. But what he had concluded is that having gone through the trauma of World War I, that French society was unprepared to meet the challenge of the Nazi invasion. And so that's profound lack of confidence, lack of common identity, the failure of elites over the years. It's really, it's a fascinating treatment of that collapse. It was a setup for that collapse in 1940. And so I'm just wondering I'm wondering about, the 9/11, unanticipated length and difficulties of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the financial crisis 2008, 2009, lay an opioid epidemic on top of that, right? The diminishing confidence in elites over time. I mean, were we just set up to surrender to COVID-19? And is that what we're seeing?
I don't think it's surrender, though. I mean, I think what happened was the public health bureaucracy did all the wrong things, and the worse it went, the more they doubled down on those wrong things. I mean, there were very early mistakes made on testing. There were early mistakes made on the nature of the origins of the pandemic.
The telling of noble lies, as Fauci admitted to.
Yeah, and so we now know from their emails that the people who were in charge of public health policy made a series of terrible errors, and they got trapped in a set of positions, including on masks, which they arrived at eventually, on the origins of the pandemic, which they decided to fake in order to provide cover for the Chinese Communist Party for reasons that will doubtless one day be explained. And I think it's the disconnect between the way the public health bureaucracy thought about the pandemic and the way ordinary people behave that's crucial here, especially when one has the sense that in private, a lot of people in the political elite didn't really abide by these rules.
Right,
We know that Nancy Pelosi did it. We know that Gavin Newsom is not much better than Boris Johnson when it comes to not abiding by these rules. And that's why it's not been like a war. You know, in war, certainly in France or Britain in 1940, everybody was in it. And although doubtless there were irritating petty bureaucrats, turn that light out, don't you know there's a war on, there was a war on. The interesting thing about COVID is that it never felt like a war. And that, I think, is why, although people went along with a great deal that they were asked to do, now that they discover, A, that it didn't work.
Yes.
I mean, let's face it, most of these things wholly failed to stop nearly a million people dying in the
with the exception of the vaccine and
Yeah.
the biomedical innovations.
But
we've seen
most of the
associated with that.
non-pharmaceutical interventions in the United States seem to have been highly ineffectual. And then it turns out that the elites didn't abide by these rules anyway. And this brings me to my question for John. It seems like, and the paper came out just a couple of weeks ago, there is an argument to be made that if you do a serious cost-benefit analysis, that the costs that we've inflicted on our society through a variety of non-pharmaceutical interventions were not justified in terms of the public health benefit. If that's the case, and there's at least one paper out making that argument, then we can look back and say, a little bit like the French after 1940, this was a policy disaster. It involved sacrifice, loss of education, lots of people's cancer operations were postponed, and it didn't work. That's the thing that's gradually dawning on people. We did all this,
Why?
and we still ended up with 1 million dead.
Well, do you think that it's going to prove the Great Barrington authors were right?
I'm beginning to think so, yes. Actually. What do you think, John?
Well, I've read some of the, there's actually now even review papers.
Yeah.
These costs were enormous, not just sort of overall costs, as Barry mentioned, the cost to kids, especially falling on low-income minority kids, kids who are already challenged to get a decent education. One of your podcasts mentioned, which I thought was brilliant, the lack of sort of community programs that now, you know, kids are out there shooting each other because they're not playing midnight basketball. And you know, the trillions of dollars lost in lockdowns for nothing. It's clear this, you know, it just did essentially nothing to slow the disease. Now, if we could learn this lesson, it would be great. We have a tendency in this country to, because we have to justify the narrative, to enshrine whatever idiocy we did last time as the only way to address things next time. So if we could come to this collective realization this was a disaster and not do it next time, that would be great. So long as next time isn't a pandemic where 30% of the people die, whereas in fact, there you really do need to lock down.
Yeah, the stakes are too high.
We could learn the
not to.
long
Yeah,
lesson.
there's too high not to.
But learning the right lesson would be. Now, the other great thing in what you've all mentioned is that it is clear in trying to understand what happened, the elites are not, they're hypocritical, but they also don't believe it. So they were passing things that they themselves did not believe to be true, because if they had believed it, they would have put their own masks on and not had parties and so forth. So it was infection control theater. It was to try to understand what's happening. They were responding to a demand that they saw it. Now, possibly this keeps them in power to sort of keep up a big enemy. But there's also a selection of the people who wander around Palo Alto outside in a 30-mile-an-hour wind with 3 masks on. There is a demand for it's always we're always in great danger sort of thing.
There are two impulses, aren't there? There's the petty, officious impulse. Acton said that absolute power corrupts absolutely, but petty power corrupts pettily. And you encounter the petty people who are the people who say, oh, you should really be wearing a mask in here. That pettiness. But the other thing that's fascinating to me is that strange pathology of excessive prudence. The people
safetyism.
with the two masks on their bicycles.
But safetyism focused on one thing. We're going to destroy the economy. We're going to destroy.
But I'm going to feel
education,
virtuous.
But we're going to feel virtuous about this one little dimension of safety.
No, I think
This is
the
where
gratification.
and Jonathan Haidt saw this coming. The safetyism.
Totally.
It was already ingrained, as it seemed like. And I'm in a profession where if you're obsessed with safetyism, that's probably the most dangerous thing you can do, right? Because you have to interact with the enemy, and if you don't take risk, you can't seize the initiative. You cede the initiative to your enemy, and you typically lose catastrophically by trying to be safe.
I'm kind of interested to know how much this safetyist mentality has permeated the armed forces.
Well, it's a constant struggle, and I don't want to. We want to get our guest in here, but when in times of peace, safetyism creeps in, and we saw this in the 1990s. There were all sorts of metrics that were tracked during our interventions in the Balkans, which were relatively safe operations compared to combat operations in places like Afghanistan and in Iraq, and it's that sort of focus on the pettiness creeps in, can creep into a peacetime armed force. And it's really important that commanders recognize, how important it is from a psychological perspective, to prepare units to take risk and to act aggressively in battle.
Actually, I want to segue into Joe Rogan. Speaking of petty people, do petty people listen to Joe Rogan? You've been on Rogan?
To be outraged.
You've been on Rogan, Neil?
I have not. No, I haven't made the cut.
Oh my
I'm
God.
not
That's
sufficient.
Rogan.
If Neil doesn't make it, I'm
not sufficiently heterodox.
Barry, have you done Rogan?
I've done Rogan twice.
Okay, two things I want to look at with Rogan. First of all, how he handled this situation. And long story short, he first promised to do better when he came under fire for vaccine talk. Secondly, he issued an apology, flat-out apology, after it was unearthed that he had done racial, horribly racial words.
There's a video that's out that's a compilation of me saying the N-word. It's a video that's made of clips taken out of context of me of 12 years of conversations on my podcast.
And then thirdly, he then turned things around and decided to go after CNN and said, in effect, you guys clean up your act. Lay off me, you clean up your own act. Did he handle this correctly?
Well, missing from that, importantly, is what Spotify did.
Right. I want to get to Spotify in a second, because I want to talk about Spotify and the business model. But first, you do podcasts as well. If you're confronted with a situation, would you have done what Joe Rogan did, or was there a different playbook?
Joe Rogan did what he did because he's fundamentally a good person, and he wants to live in a world I think we all want to live in, where apologies mean I'm sorry. Unfortunately, it's not realist. We live in a world in which apologies are a confession of a crime, a moral crime.
Right.
And it's essentially weaponizing it's handing your ideological enemies or your political enemies sort of a rope with which to hang you. And so while the first sort of David Sachs and others were calling it a non-apology, the first one I thought was good and thoughtful. I do think he's had people on the show that have promoted unfortunate misinformation about vaccines. Then again, he's had on Sanjay Gupta. He's had on almost everybody other than Neil.
Yeah.
And
I'm not.
So in a way,
I don't hold it against.
So in a way, it was cherry picking. But the second apology, right? It's unfortunate only because Joe Rogan, as everyone who knows him has attested, it's not a racist.
Right.
Joe Rogan's used a word that I never use. But then again, what happens when someone who's trying to sort of take him out politically, or take him out because frankly he's more powerful than the entire legacy press, a single podcast from a comedian, what happens when they do the supercut of the word dyke, or a supercut of the word tranny, or a supercut of all of the things that I'm sure he said over the years? Once he starts apologizing, sort of where does that end?
Right.
And the thing that is concerning to me is the fact that rather than say, and this is the same story at the New York Times, it's the same story in every institution. What did the CEO of Spotify, who I'm sure is a lovely guy, and was incredibly smart to bring on Joe Rogan, what did he do in response to this sort of, in my view, totally concocted outcry, mostly from his employees and a little bit from a political operation called Midas Touch? He agreed to, $100 million in woke indulgences. He apologized for sort of user safety and, again, using this language of safety as if a podcast can cause physical harm. I feel like that's like, here's a general who fights in wars, and here are people in America working, not even America, a Swedish company. God knows how amazing their social services and healthcare is, talking about how a podcast from a guy in Austin causes them to be unsafe in the workplace. So, if he had to go back and, he did it, I think, because he's a well-intentioned, good person. Unfortunately, I don't think it's getting the result that he intended.
Yeah, and I don't know how much Joe Rogan everybody watches, but he doesn't really push an agenda. What he's trying to do is he's trying to create a space for open, meaningful discussion, which we all really need more than anything. I mean, that's what you do on Honestly. And I think it's more important than ever, and if everybody is so ready to take offense, that's another element of this safetyism. Everybody wants to be offended and be a victim of something, right? It is the valorization of victimhood is what we're up against here as well. And everybody, I think is becoming more fragile as a result of this. And we need to be resilient, right? I mean, if we're going to use the combat analogy, we could take this too far. But really what's important in combat is confidence. Confidence in your own ability and confidence in the man or woman next to you. And the recognition that they're willing to sacrifice for the collective good. Absent that kind of cohesion, and I think you can extrapolate that to social cohesion, you're going to have an organization that is prone to disintegration, right? And I think in the face of battle, a great book by John Keegan.
John Keegan.
He said that what battles have in common is human. The struggle of men and of course women now struggling to reconcile their instinct for self-preservation with the achievement of some aim over which others are trying to kill them, right? So I think what we need is, we need to really focus less on our self-preservation and the achievement of the aim, building a better future, for generations to come.
He's the resident optimist, by the way.
I love
Chasing
it.
through that.
Well, the thing that scares me, though, about the Rogan example is, this is Joe Rogan. This is the most, like I said, the most powerful person in American media.
Right.
By far. If he can't withstand the mob, what does that mean for everyone else downstream? What does that mean for everyone else that dares to sort of think differently or say something that doesn't go along with every new sort of aspect of the woke orthodoxy? Look what happened to him. I just think you cannot overestimate the downstream effects of an incident like this, which, by the way, is still unfolding. We'll have to see. To me, it's, Joe Rogan can walk away and have an independent platform in a week,
right,
that arguably could be, worth, although you're the economist, worth more than Spotify or worth a lot. I mean, according to some estimates, he's dropping like a Taylor Swift album every single day.
One platform did offer him $100 million to leave Spotify. So the market works to his advantage.
Yeah.
But he can do this because he's big. Right. If I say something wrong on Twitter, I can't start a new platform. No one's going to pay me $100 million to do something else. And this is just the latest in something we see 3 times a week in academia. Somebody dares to utter, some slightly ill-punctuated tweet, has happened to the guy from Georgetown Law School.
Shapiro.
Shapiro, thank you.
Right.
And immediately they pile on and he loses
And
his job.
there is a clear case of bad faith, which I think also applies to Joe Rogan and the N-word. The people who launch these attacks know that they're taking words out of context and they are cynically trying to smear somebody. They know that this is bad faith. But John, your point is absolutely right. In academia, it's a highly effective tactic because Georgetown is not Spotify. Georgetown is in a position to throw Elias Shapiro under the bus if they decide that, on balance, they would rather appease the woke mob than stand up to academic freedom. So here, I think you get a completely different. There's no kind of Joe Rogan's in a strong position, as you say, Bill. He has got options.
Also, this is
it's
also an
not.
easy
I brought
business
this up.
decision for Spotify because they're choosing Joe Rogan versus Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and children of music of our youth.
But I brought this up for a reason, which is the point is not Joe Rogan.
Right.
The point is the conscious self-censoring and silencing of millions of people much smaller down the food chain, every professor at an academic institution. And it's
How
highly...
about students?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
students and people who work for corporations who now know, better, if you get yourself on Twitter, you're out of a job.
Right.
It's highly effective. You pervert the English language. I love the words safety, trauma, and violence now no longer mean what you think they mean. And you effectively silence anybody who would even whisper or allow their guests to whisper a view contrary to the mob. And
Barry, what's your strategy? Because you've had near cancellation experiences and have survived them. Have you ever done
Like
one
a
of those?
cat
Have
with
you
9
ever done one of those big apologies? I can't remember.
No, the only thing I apologized for was the first tweet of mine that kind of was a bad tweet that went viral. I was intending to praise a figure skater, and I used a line from Hamilton. immigrants, they get the job done. Obviously, I'm extremely pro-immigration. My entire record shows that. It was mischaracterized as bad faith, as being sort of anti-Asian racism. Anyway, the details of it aren't important. What's important is it was my first time in the stocks, and I was at the Times at the time, and I was going on Bill Maher that week, and they said to me basically, "You really need to clean this up." And I did it, and Bill looked at me like I had a third eye, like, "Why are you apologizing for a tweet? What universe do you live in?" But it speaks to your point about, if you get big enough, you can kind of zoom past all of it. You can, post and ghost, as they say, not even look at your mentions. But if you're coming up, and this was a few years ago, I was really scared at the time of what it meant. The thing that I've been thinking about, and it's kind of a philosophical question, I don't know the answer to it. If we know that apologies aren't really apologies anymore.
They're confessions.
They're confessions.
Right.
What do you do if you actually do something wrong and you want to apologize?
You have to take a leaf out of Jackie Fisher's book. Admiral Jackie Fisher, pre-First World War, said, "Never apologize, never explain." And I'm trying to take that to heart, because there is no longer any point in apologizing. It's
That's
actually,
what Trump taught us, sort
it's
of.
the
Well,
blood.
I was
in
just
the-
going to
it's
say
the
that reminds
blood
me
in
of a
the
boss I
water.
used to have.
Right.
You know,
Put your head down and keep going forward. Exactly.
But
But
isn't that unfortunate?
Isn't that the
it
takeaway?
is unfortunate. It is unfortunate, I think, though, because I think we want to be empathetic, right? We need to be able to understand really complex problems from the perspective of others. It's really a precondition for having meaningful, respectful discussions. And if we lose that, and if we become defensive to the point that we're saying, hey, we're never going to apologize because we believe in our own infallibility, or we're at least afraid that if we show any kind of chink in our armor, that it's going to be the beginning of the end for us. So I hope it doesn't get that bad, Neil, but I understand what you're saying. I mean,
Well, it definitely is that bad. The question is the right way to resist it by doing as you're said, taking a page of Trump's book, essentially, and just never giving in, always being
double down
defensive,
on
doubling
whatever it
down,
is.
brazen through? Or is the solution to sort of, I don't know, like do what we know is the right thing, which is, if we want to repair a relationship or we know we've done something wrong, to apologize, knowing it can be used against us.
Let's distinguish two scenarios. One scenario is you have, you've got 280 characters and something was mispunctuated or could be taken out of context.
Right.
Twitter goes nuts. Students are out demanding that you be fired and so forth. How you handle that is one question. But the other question is the larger question of public discourse, where you're not fighting an attempt by the mob to cancel you. And discourse only happens if you can say, oh, what we do all the time, HR, gee, I was wrong. Thanks. You taught me a great lesson here. Can you afford in public discourse to say, I've just learned something from you. I've understood your point of view. Now, in our branch, I think you can, if you're not putting a mob at bay. In a lot of our political discussion, that seems harder and harder. You always seem to have to pose as, this was the idea I've had since I was 6 years old, and it's immutable, and I don't care what anybody else says. And watching the spin come out of both of our parties, it always seemed we were always, not only just we're right now, but we've always been right, and we never listen and we never change our minds. That's an unfortunate kind of public discourse.
I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on the Super Bowl, which I know Neil did not watch.
No, I did not.
I didn't either.
I didn't even watch the ads. That's how un-American I am.
Super Bowl, right? Super Bowl. But if you watch the ads, Bari, celebrity after celebrity after celebrity trying to sell you on crypto. And so
really?
They're just trying to attach celebrity cool to crypto. So maybe that's what Spotify's after, by going after the Obamas and Harry and Meghan. They're trying to give you celebrity cool into joining their
I think
site.
the real story is, that Joe Rogan got big enough and unignorable enough that Spotify was willing to take a risk on him. Mm-hmm. The Harrys and Meghans, the Obamas, the Gimlets, I could go on. That's par for the course. That's what these companies are. What the shock is when you can sort of smuggle in someone across the border of these companies that isn't in line with it. Right. And that really just speaks to Rogan's unbelievable impact. Mm-hmm. And I think the question everyone else should be asking is, why is it, if you look at his success, why aren't other cable news companies, streamers, other podcasts, like, why aren't they trying to get a piece of that? Why aren't they trying to imitate that? why is it that they're leaving such an enormous audience sort of for him
Unchallenged.
to have
Yeah.
unchallenged?
Yeah.
And the reason is the ideological takeover of all of these institutions. They're all too scared to do it.
But does that mean that in the end, everybody controversial ends up on Substack? I mean, I began
is
to
what
wonder if that was where Joe Rogan
This
was
is what
going to end
I
up.
think we're going long term. I don't know enough about the blockchain. I'm sure you guys know more than me. Maybe that's our way out of this problem. Okay. But in the short term, I do think what we're looking ahead toward is a world of two of everything. And there's going to be the Spotify thing. There's going to be the blue chip thing, let's say in the world of podcasting and music, that's going to be technologically good. It's going to be sleek, but it's going to be ideologically one flavor. And then you're going to get the problem of like everyone else is going to go toward this other, I don't know what it will be, the alternative platform. And you'll get the problem of like, it's the free speech people and everyone's crazy uncle. Which one would you want to be a part of? So it's going to be two of everything. And the one of the two things is going to be worse.
Well, maybe we should explain to the viewers a bit about Substack and what it represents and also how it's going for you since you joined that platform. Because I think it's a very interesting development that so many of the best writers in America, you, Andrew Sullivan, who's been on this show, Matt Taibbi, who was on your podcast, are now on Substack and no longer writing for magazines or newspapers. They are on Substack with subscribers. I subscribe to all of the above.
I don't know how you have time, but thank you.
I don't. I've now realized that I essentially pay my friends to write things that I don't have time to read. But this is
Well,
not
your
new
friends
to me. I'm a
appreciate it.
member of numerous clubs which I don't have time to go to. It's a kind of tax that you pay your friends. It's fine. I'm hoping they buy my books and don't read them. But let's assume that we're in a sort of
promise that.
an economy of reciprocity where we pay one another to do things, to produce things we don't have time to consume. But does this not raise the danger of silo life? Where
Yes.
all the people who believe in free speech are subscribing to one another's Substacks, but we've lost. That's basically, we're in shelters, but we've lost the war.
I think
That's my big worry.
I think we're in a liminal place. I think we're in a place where, let me see if I can do this in a sharp way. Do I need to explain what Substack is, or do people know what that is?
Quick thumbnail.
Substack is a new independent platform, one of many. Perhaps you've heard of Rumble. Mom, maybe you have. Perhaps you've heard of Callin. It's sort of the Cambrian explosion of new platforms that are trying to uphold the values of the free and open internet. Substack is a platform for writers. It has a range of people, everyone from Salman Rushdie to George Saunders to Padma Lakshmi, Alison Roman, me, all the people you just named, Glenn Greenwald. It's a mixture of people about all kinds of subjects.
It's very ideologically diverse.
Yeah, it's a newsletter platform that allows us to get paid directly by an audience. So if you've heard of Patreon, it's quite similar to that. So to go back to your question, have we lost? If the question is, have we lost the legacy institutions? The answer is 100% yes. The question is, what can come from that loss? Right now, we are in the kind of earliest stages of the building of new things. What that looks like right now is, like you just said, it's all these little islands. The question is, what happens once we're able, I don't know even what the right geographic analogy is, but to bundle those silos, to bundle those islands. That's what I think we're heading toward, because you might have the, disposable income and good heart to want to, subscribe to 10 of these newsletters.
No, I can't afford it.
But you can't afford it.
Honestly, it's
Exactly.
going to break me.
It's going to break you.
One more subscription,
It's
and I don't
gonna
know.
kill you.
Kids are going to have to start going out
But
to
people
work.
are paying more for their newsletters and podcasts and Patreons than they are for the old New York Times. And there's a reason that someone like the New York Times, they get everything in one thing. That's what I believe that we will be heading toward.
So I'd like to coin a phrase: the free speech archipelago.
Love it. Yes, exactly.
That is
John has
a
been
good
John has been
phrase.
taking
copious
I
notes.
know. I'm like, what do you see?
Barry,
This
this
is a
is
business
This is a
plan.
window into GoodFellows. John takes notes.
Rebundle.
Neil hates the notes, so I've been waiting for Neil to kind of grab the pad at some point.
I just look over his shoulder and kind of steal the ideas. I can't read his handwriting. I don't know
Fire
what
away.
I don't know what it says. But yeah, come on, you're the economist. This looks to me like a classic economics problem.
It actually is.
There are
Because if you
too
wanna
many
bundle
subscriptions.
Yes, and if you want to bundle people, right? Let's say I want to go out and propose to Andrew Sullivan, hey, let's jump
If you
in
propose to
together.
Andrew Sullivan, that would be a story bigger than Kanye West.
I want to do two preferably.
Anyway, it's too expensive is the point. Right?
No, it doesn't. I can't solve this problem, which is one reason I continue to write for Bloomberg Opinion and
Love that paywall.
Don't go Substack. But John, solve The Economist. It's a problem for an economist.
So I want to make 2 prefatory comments. This is the difficulty of writing things down. One, Substack, we were sort of bemoaning. No, you don't. See, a historian, he can remember astonishing things. You can ask these guys, and they'll tell you they'll tell you the sequence of battle in the which division was on the Marne. Number one, there's something very hopeful here.
think he's
When
stereotyping.
old institutions rot, new institutions can
Feel
enter.
offended.
Yes.
And Substack is an example of this is our one hope, as long as they're allowed to. And this is one of the things I worry about, the new regulation of the internet. What regulation does is it stops entry and this right to create new stuff and kick out the old ones. Remember that, the internet's all a monopoly. Yahoo, Netscape, and AOL are in charge of it, right? So this is our great hope. Second point, there's this sort of nostalgia for the national institutions where we all kind of had one thing together. But the early era of the printing press, or even the early United States, was pamphlets and newspapers and people spreading all sorts of fake news. We only got sort of 3 networks and 3 large newspapers under a lot of regulation and a lot of censorship of all sorts of ideas. So I'm not unhappy about lots of crazy ideas. I think that nostalgia is something we should be aware of. But yes, it needs to come together. And this bundling is it's kind of unfortunate that, so I don't subscribe to as many things as I'd love to, because they're all under a paywall. And I want to read one article every 2 months. And I don't want to just subscribe to this one thing. Why can I not spend, this is, to some extent, there are models for this, but they don't work. Why can't I spend, $50 a month and I get access to everything?
Why isn't Substack offering me a bundle where it's discounted?
Right.
And I can get Bari and Andrew Sullivan, and I get Matt Taib. I can get my favorite authors with at least some discount. I'm waiting for that to happen. But market failure, guys. Or maybe you just
not a market failure. It's good for the creator.
Right. Okay.
It's great for the creator, right? And the question, right, is can you come up with a model that rewards the creators in the way we're getting rewarded now, or the journalists, but there's all kinds of people in this realm that we're talking about, that is also effective and smooth for the reader. And we have the first part. We do not have the second part yet. I have some ideas about how the second part could look. I just want to pick up on one thing, which is the regulation thing, although maybe you want to get to truckers later. But it's connected. Well,
I just sit here.
have you been following? I mean,
the economic model. We need to
terrifying
finish up the
thing
economic
is happening
models.
right now that I don't think most normies are following, and that is we know what cancel culture looks like, and silencing and self-censorship. We know what deplatforming looks like. Now we're seeing what debanking looks like, and what does it mean when the government of Canada?
Right.
It's not just GoFundMe. Now it's they're shutting down people's individual accounts, I believe.
Right.
They're shutting down the use of using Bitcoin and the kinds of things that activists use that maybe some people are uncomfortable with, whatever. The point is, I don't remember any analogous thing happening in the summer of 2020. And now that is happening.
So this is the argument for crypto.
Yes.
Another of my favorite Substack contributors is Antonio Garcia Martinez.
Yes.
Author of Chaos Monkeys, but a great tech pioneer, as well as a very funny and interesting
Great
writer.
writer.
And he commented on recent events, including in Canada, with the remark, "This kind of thing makes me want to, load up on crypto and head off into the wilderness." Because to go back to this issue of can you be financially cancelled, I think there's a major concern brewing that if woke corporations, if wokeness becomes so much a part of corporate America, that we find ourselves being told, we noticed that you have a subscription to the notorious heretical figure of Bari Weiss and Substack. We are unable to pay the subscription, or if you continue to pay the subscription, we will have to suspend your account. That's the point at which I think we're in a new and very worrying environment. And that's when you start to think, where's my ETH? Where's my Bitcoin?
Well, take the example also of, no fan of Michelle Malkin. It seems like she spun off into crazy land. But should her husband be barred from Airbnb as he is right now?
Right.
You know, should we
It is-
hold
it's like-
people
it's like a-
accountable for the
Yeah.
moral crimes?
But that's
and
the
thought
Chinese
crimes?
social credit system comes to us,
That's
right?
No,
here.
that's what it is.
That's the thing,
It's
that's
Chinese Communist
here.
Party system. I mean,
I'd like to get back to the truckers
Wait,
for a
wait,
second.
wait.
If you,
We gotta.
Okay.
Okay. We're gonna have to.
He needs to talk about Bitcoin.
We're only halfway through the paddle.
For once, I'm having trouble getting a word in edgewise. It's never happened before.
Shut up.
No, you're doing great. We want to go on longer than Bill likes us to go on.
Point 3 of 8. Go ahead.
There's a big issue here. What's crucial to your political freedoms? Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the freedom to transact anonymously, the freedom to buy and sell without the government knowing what you're doing or approving of it this is John Cochrane view, but I'll announce it, just crucial to your political freedom. And the example you gave of the Canadian truckers, I think, is one of the best examples right there. If the government can sanction you by watching your transactions, by freezing you out of the money system. Now, we've had cash. Cash was anonymous, and cash is the ability to make cash transactions is a wonderful defense for your political freedom. Imagine running for office and everything you ever bought or sold is available online, one hacker away. You could bring down anybody instantly. It's also a great hedge.
What are you buying, John? I was just out of curiosity. No, I'm only kidding.
You're setting me up for making horrible jokes that are inappropriate for the Goodfellows.
But this is a hard.
Goodfellows.
So Bitcoin is just immediately we'll all go to crypto is not the answer. Because there's also a problem if you have completely cheap anonymous transactions, nobody ever pays taxes again. Ransomware goes nuts. There's a point to some. So with cash we have sort of an uneasy balance. It's kind of inconvenient.
No, but I could pay, say, with Lightning for my Substack sub without having to run past JP Morgan's gatekeepers. I mean, that's the problem.
the government
the
can
banking
tell.
system's woke. I mean, it doesn't need the government. John, it doesn't matter whether the government's woke or not. If corporate America,
That's
if
what we're
Wall Street's
seeing.
woke, then your transactions start to be subject to some kind of social credit monitoring. And that's where crypto does offer a solution. Not because it's anonymous, but it simply doesn't go through woke corporate gatekeepers.
Right. So a little more competition in banking and an understanding that you have some rights to do things. I think is without it. I think the banking and government system and our surveillance system will be able to bottle you up no matter what you do. So crypto is not a magic solution to all this stuff because it also it goes through computers which they can look at just as easily as anything else.
Well, we're certainly not going to be doing our Substack subscriptions with banknotes. I can't see
Exactly.
bags of coins.
That's
But
the problem.
I guess one of the questions I have for Bari is, so when does it become sort of a critical mass of people who reject, sort of the offensive against freedom of speech? Tell us about your audience. Who are you reaching? What kind of feedback are you getting? Because I think there's a tendency to think, okay, we are all of a particular political ilk, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a platform that you operate on and that you give voice to people with opposing points of view. I mean, tell us about your audience, and does that make you optimistic that you're bringing in,
I promise I'm not
backgrounds?
paying him to do ads for me.
No, but also you might want to share your vision too on what you want to do personally to address the failure of the Fourth Estate. That's something
Yeah.
I would like to hear your kind of thoughts on as well.
Okay, and then let's go back to the soft social credit system because this to me is enormously important. If Substack tomorrow decides, we're going to go woke, that's what happens pretty much every time. So what happens to me then? Okay, great. I go on my own website that I create, but that website is hosted by Amazon Web Services.
Right.
And that can be subject, as we learned through Parler and all the things that happened around the election, that can be taken offline too. So are we headed to a world, and then I promise I'll answer your question, where there's essentially a blue stack or a woke stack and a red stack? Is that that is what I'm fascinated by and cannot stop thinking about because there's there's sort of no end to this question. It begins with, cancellations on Twitter. It goes to deplatforming. Now it's debanking. Do we sort of need to go to a place where there's going to be two internets? I really loathe to think about that. As for my audience, I think one of the things that's been really gratifying and interesting to me is, more than after a year, it's like 160,000 people are getting these emails. It's a lot of people, and a big percentage of them are paying. And what's fascinating to me is I sort of assumed they would be like me, disillusioned liberals in blue bubbles. In fact, what they are, although there are many of those, and they're like closeted professors at some of our best universities, but there's, Christian homeschooling moms, there's ranchers in Oklahoma. It's like America. It's the whole range of people. And I think what they have in common is a kind of exhaustion with the ideology, but enough of a sophistication to understand that, if you have prestige world, which is the old world, whose prestige is crumbling by the day because its trust is, they've imploded. And then you have maverick world. And maverick world is, cool because it's authentic and it's transparent, but it lacks the fact checking and the gatekeeping of the old world. And I think what I'm trying to do, and I hope what my audience sees that I'm trying to do, although I've never quite articulated it this way, is to sort of be prestige maverick. I'm trying to bring and marry the high quality, really truth pursuing elements that the old world did at its best, and the ethics, exactly, married to authenticity and honesty. And my bet is that there's just an absolutely enormous audience for that, because that's pretty much everyone I know.
Absolutely. I agree completely. That's what everybody's waiting for, needs now. And then what's great about it is that if there is a place to go, you can kind of ignore the nutty stuff, because you're going to a place that is inclusive in terms of the audience, and that can be the basis for meaningful, respectful discussions about the challenges and opportunities we face. I mean, that's what we need to get back to arrest kind of the centripetal forces that are just spinning us apart from each other.
Yeah, I'll say just two things. One is on something that I'm struggling with and that I criticized the New York Times for, but I realized it doesn't matter if you're an individual proprietor or CNN or Fox, you face exactly the same problem. And that's the problem of audience capture. And that's a problem that, aside from starting a nonprofit, really hasn't been solved by anyone. If you know that your audience loves a certain kind of red meat, you have to be extraordinarily disciplined not to feed them that same red meat every single time, not to give them the political heroin that they, fiend for, and to,
I think it's maybe some late night cable TV hosts.
Yeah, exactly. But like have the role of an editor and say, you know what? No, I'm going to trade away some short-term profit for the sake of long-term trust. And so my audience knows, I'm going to tell you guys some things that really annoy you. I mean, when I write about foreign policy, it really annoys them. Anything, basically, if it's cancel culture every day, they're thrilled. If I mix up what's at the buffet, they're not as thrilled. My numbers go down, but I'm doing that anyway, because I think it's really important to respect my audience enough to say, this is what I'm good at. What I'm good at is sort of curating stories about what I think are important in the world.
So you're building a larger long-term audience. I mean, certainly every survey I see of American attitudes shows, 20% rabid right-wing partisans, 20% rabid left-wing partisans, and a vast majority in the middle who expresses exactly the kind of views you just expressed. Now, they're less quick to jump. You don't hear from them as loudly, but slowly but surely they start canceling their New York Times subscriptions and they start canceling their their Fox News or whatever is on the right subscriptions. And slowly but surely you build a reputation for getting that audience that you described.
So Bari, what's your advice to a young journalist who comes out of Columbia or Medill and is now getting into the business and has not experienced the opinion section of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal? Would you tell them to go straight to Substack and do their own thing, or would you put them in a news publication for a few years? How would you proceed?
Well, they should send me their application. The thing is, I wouldn't tell them to go to Substack right away.
Really?
And the reason is that, there's two reasons. One, in order to really succeed on that platform, you need to have built up an audience sort of already. That's what we see from the people that are succeeding most on the platform, that and sort of first movers. The second thing I would say, and this has just always been true, is scoops are everything. Information is everything. Reporting is what I'm looking for. And I think that's what any good editor is looking for. And the thing is that for all of the ideological things that we detest about the old institutions, we still need a world with institutions, because institutions groom people. How do you think I can do what I do? It's because very patient people poured untold numbers of hours into my growth. They rewrote, every editorial I wrote, every piece I wrote at the Wall Street Journal was rewritten for like 5 years. And now I'm doing that for people. And that's ultimately what I'm interested in doing. Because if you're just a really smart person, not me, but a really smart person with a podcast and a newsletter, that's great for you. And you can make a really good living doing it.
Right.
But if you're ultimately interested in changing the culture in a foundational way, you have to build an institution, because you need a way to sort of mentor younger people and create guardrails and bring them up in a culture, right, that you are spending a great deal of time creating. So basically, the only thing I do now, other than editing, writing, hosting, is searching for that new talent. And one of the things that gives me hope, actually, and I hope you guys feel this way when you interact with undergraduates here, is that, oh my God, there's a lot of incredibly talented, sane people who don't want to go along with an ideology that forces them to closet themselves.
That is so
right?
true. That's my experience completely here and in other universities where I've taught or lectured. But what I do see is a concerning trend toward self-censorship among students, because they're afraid, to get the tweet with like 5 fire emojis on it in response to something they say in class.
But I think there's two things. One, they need models of people that get the fire emojis and worse, withstand it, and become stronger for it.
Yeah.
They need people that they can look to and say, she did it, I can do it too. They need heroes and mentors.
Right.
And the second thing is that, why are they self-censoring? They're self-censoring not just because of social pressure. They're self-censoring because they're thinking, if I want a career at McKinsey or Goldman or whatever, I know middle schoolers that are self-censoring that tell me that, because they're thinking, I want to get into a good high school. I want to get into a college. I want this whole system. We need to provide those young people with an alternative set of places where they can aspire to, where they can go, where they can have a career, where they can meet their spouses. If the only thing that they have is this sort of like wokeified corporate, blob, of course they're going to do that, because that's the only world that it seems to them that they can live in.
It should be said, this is one reason that you and I got involved with the idea of creating a new university in Austin,
Yes.
because we don't think it's enough just to be on Substack. We have to build institutions where there can be intergenerational knowledge transfer, and where these courageous young people can come thinking, you know what, I actually can say what I think in this classroom, and it's not going to lead to my future cancellation. So I think this is something where we both agree that institution building has only just begun, but we can no longer hold out hope, serious hope, of recapturing the established institutions, because they've gone. Whether it's the New York Times or Yale, there's no getting it back. Certainly not within the lifetime of Thomas and Campbell.
Exactly.
We have to think about, what are they going to do? If I fast forward just a few years, when Thomas is 18, he's not going to have the opportunities I had when I went to Oxford in the early 80s with the self-same Andrew Sullivan. We could say exactly whatever we liked with no negative consequences. And thank God there was no social media, so it can't be tracked down and archaeologically used to destroy us. But I mean, that doesn't exist now. And I look at Thomas, who's extremely bright and certainly not woke and eager to challenge the things that he's told at school. And I think, well, what are we going to do with you for just a few years down the line? Because it ain't Yale.
We can't give up, though, right? We had Mitch Daniels on this program. You've got from Purdue University. You've got Michael Crow at Arizona State. I mean, leaders still have a role in reforming institutions. But I think the creation of University of Austin is a great example of maybe that will help awaken the woke to the fact that they're going to be rendered irrelevant if they don't modify their behavior and help strengthen the institutions that sadly they're hollowing out.
Yeah. One of the things that excites me as an historian is that when I look back over the great waves of intellectual innovation that produced the scientific revolution and Enlightenment and then Romanticism, a lot of it was done by individuals who directly dealt with their audience. I mean, if you were a fan of Walter Scott, you kind of bought the books as they came out. Same with Dickens, writing in installments to a public that was primarily loyal, not to a publisher, but to an author. I'm also struck by the fact that relatively small coalitions of the intellectually willing can achieve an awful lot, and they don't all need to be based in universities. So there is some encouragement from intellectual history that that even although it might seem that the blob is dominant, yeah, the blob was dominant in the pre-Reformation era until it wasn't. And so I'm kind of, when I think about it that way, I do think that there's something rather encouraging about the fact that all my favorite writers have defected from the blob and are going it alone. And some of them, I mean, I think, for example, I just read a great piece by Matty Iglesias, a man of the left, but someone who's someone I've greatly admired. Terrific piece, completely going against something that I think, which is that we have a problem of disinformation and misinformation.
Yes.
It's much, much worse. Conspiracy theories are a real problem. And he argues, no, this is not new. And the anti-vax phenomenon isn't really something that is especially different. Now, my first response was, this has to be wrong. But it's the fact that I'm reading it and I'm stimulated by it. That tells me that actually maybe the revolution's well underway. It's going in the right direction. And gradually we're building a new alternative ecosystem that is just more fun than the blob.
Yeah, there's no life in the blob.
The blob is deadly. Read the New York Times if you can build.
But
Let's get John and then let's wrap up.
It is important, what Bari said. We have now an ecosystem where individual successful authors can get their work out. But how do you develop new ones? I've watched sort of economists who are going into the public sphere, and many of them make just what I can tell are rookie journalist errors about how you write things, how you quote sources, whether you ask people for their opinions before you write about them in public, things that the institution of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal beat into you on how to write. So we need institutions as well as ways for individuals to get out. But that's the grand hope. I look at economic history, you look at history. It's never been about reforming the big behemoths. It's always been about the ability of new institutions to come in because old ones don't reform. The big three car companies, they didn't get reformed, or at least to the extent they got reformed, it's because the Japanese came in and cleaned their clocks. Who invented the word processor? Not the typewriter companies. IBM, Apple came in,
This is
it
a
was an
good
IBM.
column. I like this.
But that's the way it's always. So long as this is why property rights and freedom are important. So long as new institutions can come in and challenge the old ones. So that's our grand hope. The University of Austin is a grand hope. Yes, not the reform, the old battleship. Come in with a new one.
We didn't do truckers.
No, we didn't do truckers. Well, you'd have to come back. We'll do truckers.
All right.
Well, we did a little bit.
of truckers,
the
yeah.
truckers getting
Can't
their bank accounts frozen.
Okay, final segment, then we got to go. P.J. O'Rourke passed away earlier today, the great political satirist. Beautiful writer, just wonderful, great sense of humor. I'd like to get each of your thoughts on P.J., but also Neil in particular. What happened to the great art of political satire?
I think the reality became too funny in its own right.
There's
no
room
left for it.
I've
never met P.J. O'Rourke. I read him a lot. He was kind of a way into American politics in the 80s and 90s if you were sitting in Oxford. And at that time, it needed somebody with his irreverent wit to enliven the finer points of Bob Dole's career, which wasn't self-satirizing. Right. But we reached a point where I think, and he would probably have admitted it, he was sort of superfluous because the entire political process jumped the shark in around 2016, and it became harder and harder to make anything funnier than the news. So, I mean, I thought really highly of him, but it's interesting that in a way his zenith lies quite some years back when Bari was probably in
I was going
prep
to say,
school.
his books are on my dad's bookshelf.
Yeah,
but
exactly. I knew you were going to make me feel old. I hate you.
Boy, I will miss P.J. O'Rourke. I think it's a mistake to think of him just as a satirist or a humorist. I think Parliament of Whores is probably one of the best pieces of political philosophy written. Of course, I don't read as much as I should of political philosophy, but it is. I recommend read Parliament of Whores. It is actually a serious. It's like a new de Tocqueville about the nature of American politics and society. Posing, easily digestible because it's so bloody funny.
Yeah,
and that was his true, and that's timeless. That will last a long time.
HR. We'll give Barry the last word. HR.
Hey, I just think we ought to celebrate somebody who had a sense of humor, and I think sense of humor is
and drank and smoked.
Right. It's important. I think it's an indicator of empathy, right? People who have a sense of humor are generally empathetic. We need a big dose of that now, to get away from this tendency for everybody to want to be offended, to want to be a victim, to want to be outraged. Hey, lighten up a little bit,
And light up.
Right.
a large cigar in honor of
Say
PJ.
amen to HR. I've talked too much.
You get the last word, Ms.
That
Weiss.
is the last word.
That is the last word.
That is the last word.
Amen to HR. Amen to that.
Guys, great conversation. Barry, thanks for coming up and joining us today. I hope you had a good flight up from LA, and I hope your dad's having a good time here on campus as well.
Oh, I think he's excited to be here. Thank you.
Great. So that's it for this episode of GoodFellows. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. On behalf of my colleagues, Niall Ferguson, John Cochrane, HR McMaster, our special guest, Bari Weiss, thanks for watching today. We'll be back next week with a new show. Until then, take care. And again, thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed this show and are interested in watching more content featuring HR McMaster, watch Battlegrounds, also available at hoover.org.
Do you know what Wordle is?
Yes.
Okay, you do. You guys into Wordle? You're a Wordle generation here.
I don't know. I don't know. I've never played it.
No, I've managed to not know what it is.